Take off those medals." The command cut through the warm evening air so sharply that conversations around the gas station seemed to pause all at once. Vanessa Carter slowly turned her head toward the voice. A white police cruiser sat near Pump 6, its red and blue lights flashing silently against the rows of parked vehicles. Officer Ryan Mercer stepped forward with the confidence of a man who believed he already knew the truth. His eyes locked onto the military insignia attached to the black duffel bag resting beside Vanessa's SUV. "Those don't belong to you," he said. Several customers looked up from their gas pumps. Others stopped midway through carrying drinks and snacks back to their cars. Vanessa stood still beneath the bright canopy lights. At 43 years old, she looked nothing like the image many people expected when they imagined a senior Army officer. She wore faded jeans, a dark gray sweatshirt, and running shoes coated with dust from hundreds of miles on the road. Her natural curls were tied back beneath a simple baseball cap. There was nothing flashy about her appearance. Nothing that announced rank or authority. Nothing except the small military emblems attached to her travel bag. "Officer," Vanessa replied calmly, "those items belong to me." Ryan glanced toward the decorations again. His expression hardened. "I've met real soldiers," he said, "and I know stolen valor when I see it." The words hung in the air. A few customers exchanged uncertain looks. One man standing near the convenience store in trance quietly pulled out his phone. Vanessa felt dozens of eyes settling on her. The smell of gasoline drifted through the humid North Carolina night. Somewhere in the distance, a truck engine rumbled along the highway. She drew a slow breath and kept her voice steady. "You're mistaken." Ryan took another step forward, then proving it should be easy. More people stopped to watch. The gas station had become an unexpected stage. Vanessa noticed a teenage cashier staring through the glass storefront. An elderly couple paused beside their sedan. A delivery driver leaned against his truck, curiosity written across his face. She had seen crowds gather before. She had stood in briefing rooms filled with generals, foreign officials, and military advisors. Yet there was something uniquely uncomfortable about being judged by strangers who knew nothing about her except what they thought they saw. Ryan pointed toward the insignia on the bag. "Who'd you get those from?" Vanessa's eyes moved briefly to the worn duffel. Every patch attached to it carried a memory. Long nights overseas. Missed holidays. Farewells to friends who never returned home. Years of sacrifice compressed into pieces of fabric and metal. "I earned them," she answered quietly. Ryan shook his head as if the response only confirmed his suspicions. "That's what they all say." A few people murmured among themselves. Vanessa could feel the weight of assumptions forming around her. She knew this feeling. It was familiar, not because she lacked confidence, but because experience had taught her how quickly appearances could become conclusions. The officer asked another question, then another. Military terminology, unit structure, deployment history. Vanessa answered each one without hesitation. Her responses were precise, calm, and immediate. Yet somehow that only seemed to strengthen Ryan's certainty. He interpreted knowledge as rehearsal rather than proof. The more accurately she spoke, the more convinced he appeared that she had memorized the answers. The crowd grew larger. Headlights swept across the pavement as new customers arrived and noticed the gathering. Vanessa looked briefly toward the American flag flying above the station. The fabric shifted gently in the evening breeze. For a moment, memories surfaced uninvited. Early mornings before sunrise. Boots striking pavement during training runs. Letters from home. The faces of young soldiers who had trusted her leadership. She pushed the thoughts away and returned her attention to the present. Ryan's voice rose slightly. "You expect people to believe you're a high-ranking officer?" The question drew a few nervous laughs from somewhere in the crowd. Vanessa remained composed. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply met his gaze. The flashing lights reflected across the polished windows of the convenience store. Somewhere nearby, an ice machine hummed steadily. The entire scene felt strangely suspended in time. Then Ryan reached toward the duffel bag again and stared at the insignia attached near the zipper. His expression shifted into something that looked almost triumphant, as though he had finally found the evidence he wanted. Vanessa noticed it immediately. Whatever happened next, she realized, this encounter was no longer about facts. It was about perception. And perceptions, once formed, could be far harder to challenge than the truth itself. The crowd continued to grow beneath the bright canopy lights as Vanessa stood beside her SUV, her posture calm despite the attention surrounding her. Officer Ryan Mercer folded his arms and studied her with growing suspicion, convinced that confidence itself was evidence of deception. The elderly man who had first thanked Vanessa for her service stepped forward cautiously. His name was Harold Bennett, a retired Marine who still wore a faded veteran cap wherever he went. He looked from Vanessa to the officer and back again. Something about the woman reminded him of leaders he had known decades earlier, not because of her clothes or appearance, but because of the way she carried herself. She never rushed her words. She never raised her voice. She simply answered questions directly and without hesitation. Ryan noticed Harold watching and immediately addressed him. "Sir, I appreciate your service, but I need you to stay out of this." Harold nodded slowly and stepped back, though concern remained visible in his eyes. Vanessa glanced toward him briefly. The simple gesture carried quiet gratitude. For several seconds, only the distant hum of traffic filled the air. Then Ryan pointed toward the rear window of Vanessa's SUV. A military parking sticker was visible near the corner of the glass. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "It was issued to me," Vanessa replied. "By whom?" "The United States Army." A few people exchanged uncertain looks. The answer sounded too simple, too straightforward. Ryan seemed almost frustrated by how calm she remained. He walked around the vehicle, examining every detail as though searching for proof that would support his assumptions. Vanessa watched him in silence. The evening air felt heavy with humidity. Above them, the American flag continued moving gently in the breeze. A memory surfaced in Vanessa's mind. 9 months earlier, she had stood on a windswept airfield halfway across the world watching young soldiers board a transport aircraft. Many were barely older than the cashier, now staring through the gas station window. Some had been nervous. Others had tried to hide it. Before departure, she had spoken to them about duty, responsibility, and integrity. She remembered promising their families she would bring them home safely. Every face remained clear in her memory. Every name. The responsibility had never left her shoulders. Back in the present, Ryan stopped beside the driver's door. "Open the vehicle." Vanessa met his gaze. "Officer, I have already provided my identification, and I am still verifying it." His tone suggested that verification meant waiting until the evidence matched the conclusion he had already reached. The delivery driver near the diesel pumps shifted uneasily. A mother loading snacks into her minivan quietly gathered her children closer. The atmosphere had changed. What had begun as curiosity was slowly becoming discomfort. People sensed something was not right, even if they could not fully explain why. Vanessa reached into her pocket and removed her wallet. From inside, she carefully produced another identification card. The plastic surface reflected the gas station lights. Ryan accepted it and examined it closely. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the photograph, then at Vanessa, then back to the card again. "Interesting," he muttered. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Vanessa noticed it immediately. So did Harold. Yet the moment disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared. Ryan handed the card back. "Documents can be made." Several people in the crowd exchanged surprised glances. Vanessa slipped the identification back into her wallet. She realized facts alone would not change the situation. Whatever happened next would depend on something else entirely. Across the parking lot, a dark SUV turned off the highway and entered the station. Its headlights swept across the pavement before coming to a stop near the edge of the crowd. The driver remained inside for a moment. No one paid much attention. Most eyes were still focused on Vanessa and the officer standing beneath the glow of the canopy lights. But Vanessa noticed the vehicle immediately. And for the first time that evening, something subtle shifted in her expression. The dark SUV remained parked near the edge of the lot, its engine idling softly beneath the distant hum of highway traffic. Vanessa recognized the vehicle immediately, but she gave no sign that she had. Instead, she stood quietly beside her own SUV while Officer Ryan Mercer continued examining every detail around him as though certainty could be discovered through persistence alone. The crowd had settled into an uneasy silence. Nobody seemed eager to leave. People sensed they were watching something important unfold, even if they could not yet understand why. Ryan glanced toward the newly arrived vehicle before returning his attention to Vanessa. "Expecting someone?" he asked. "No more than anyone else stopping for gas," she replied. Her answer was technically true. Ryan frowned. The calmness in her voice continued to bother him. Most people became defensive under scrutiny. Others grew angry or embarrassed. Vanessa did neither. She simply remained steady, as if she had spent years learning how to stay composed while everyone around her lost perspective. The driver's side door of the dark SUV finally opened. A man stepped out wearing plain civilian clothes. He appeared to be in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, with short hair and a focused expression. Nothing about him immediately drew attention except the way he moved. Purposeful, disciplined, alert. Vanessa watched him approach from the corner of her eye. Harold Bennett noticed him too. Something about the man reminded the retired Marine of people he had encountered on military bases long ago. The newcomer stopped several yards away and surveyed the scene carefully. His gaze moved from the police cruiser to the gathering crowd and finally settled on Vanessa. Recognition flashed across his face. Not surprise. Recognition. Ryan caught the exchange immediately. "You know her?" he asked. The man answered carefully. "I know who she is." Several people shifted closer. Ryan folded his arms. "Then maybe you can explain why her story keeps changing." Vanessa almost smiled at that. Her story had not changed once. Only the assumptions surrounding it had. The newcomer looked toward her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The question was simple, respectful, and professional. It carried none of the suspicion that had defined the last 20 minutes. Vanessa nodded. "I am fine." Ryan stepped forward. "Hold on. Before we go any further, identify yourself." The man reached into his jacket and presented a credential holder. Ryan examined it briefly. His expression tightened. The document appeared legitimate, though it did not answer every question forming in his mind. "What brings you here?" Ryan asked. "Travel," the man replied. "Same as everyone else." The answer mirrored Vanessa's earlier response so perfectly that a few people in the crowd exchanged amused glances. Ryan did not find it amusing. He looked increasingly frustrated by the lack of confirmation he expected to receive. The newcomer returned his credential and turned his attention back toward Vanessa. "Long drive?" he asked. "About 400 miles, she answered. "You must be tired. Nothing a few more hours cannot handle." The conversation sounded ordinary, yet Harold noticed something unusual beneath it. The two were speaking like colleagues rather than strangers. Not friends, not family, colleagues. People accustomed to responsibility. Ryan noticed it too. His eyes narrowed again. "Enough." He gestured toward Vanessa's duffel bag. "I still have concerns about those military decorations." The newcomer looked at the patches attached to the worn fabric. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for Vanessa to notice. Respect. Genuine respect. The kind that cannot be faked. "Those decorations matter," he said quietly. Ryan nodded as though he had finally found agreement. "Exactly. But the newcomer continued. Because every one of them represents service." The words settled over the crowd. Even the teenagers recording with their phones lowered them slightly. Vanessa looked toward the American flag above the station once more. The fabric rippled against the dark sky. Somewhere beyond the gas station, another set of headlights appeared on the highway exit ramp. Several vehicles were approaching together. Ryan had not noticed them yet. Vanessa had. And this time, she knew exactly who was arriving. The distant headlights grew brighter as 3 vehicles exited the highway and entered the gas station one after another. Their arrival was orderly, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Conversations stopped completely. Even the cash register sounds drifting from inside the convenience store seemed to fade beneath the growing tension. Officer Ryan Mercer turned toward the entrance and watched the vehicles approach. The first was a dark government-issued SUV. The second was a black pickup truck. The third was another SUV bearing no obvious markings. None activated emergency lights. None rushed forward. Yet something about their presence immediately changed the atmosphere. The man who had arrived earlier in civilian clothes glanced toward the convoy and exhaled quietly. Vanessa noticed the reaction. So did Harold Bennett. The retired Marine straightened slightly, his instincts recognizing a level of organization that ordinary travelers rarely displayed. The vehicles parked near the edge of the crowd. Doors opened almost simultaneously. Several men and women stepped out. Some wore civilian clothing. Others were neatly pressed military uniforms. They did not speak at first. Their eyes scanned the area before settling on Vanessa. Ryan watched carefully. His confidence remained intact, but uncertainty had begun creeping into the corners of his expression. One uniformed officer appeared to be a major. The silver oak leaf on his chest reflected beneath the gas station lights. Nearby customers immediately noticed it. A whisper moved through the crowd. The major spotted Vanessa and stopped walking. For a brief moment, his face revealed something unmistakable: relief. Then, he approached. Vanessa remained beside her SUV, calm as ever. The major came to a stop several feet away. His posture straightened instantly. Every movement became precise, professional, respectful. The crowd watched in complete silence. Ryan opened his mouth as if preparing to ask a question. Before he could speak, the major raised his hand in a formal salute toward Vanessa. The gesture seemed to freeze the entire parking lot. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from the soft flutter of the American flag overhead. Ryan blinked. He looked from the major to Vanessa and back again. His certainty wavered for the first time all evening. Vanessa returned the salute calmly. Nothing about her expression suggested satisfaction or triumph. She simply acknowledged the gesture with the same quiet professionalism she had shown from the beginning. The major lowered his hand. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "we have been trying to reach you for over an hour." Several people exchanged stunned glances. Ryan stepped forward immediately. "Hold on. I need clarification." The major turned toward him. "Clarification regarding what?" Ryan gestured toward Vanessa. "Her identity." The major stared at him for several seconds. Not with hostility, not with anger, simply with confusion, as though he could not understand why clarification was necessary. The man in civilian clothes folded his arms and remained silent. He already knew where this conversation was heading. Ryan continued. "She claims military service." The words sounded different now, less certain, less authoritative. The major glanced toward Vanessa, then toward the patches on her duffel bag, then back at Ryan. "Claims," he repeated. A few members of the crowd lowered their phones, suddenly realizing the situation might be very different from what they had assumed. The humid evening air felt heavier than before. Ryan sensed the shift, yet he pressed forward. "I am conducting verification." The major nodded slowly. "Understood." His tone remained polite, professional, controlled. Then he looked toward the newest arrival stepping from the final SUV. An older man wearing a service uniform emerged from the vehicle. 2 stars gleamed beneath the canopy lights. The crowd collectively inhaled. Even people with little military knowledge recognized that the insignia represented someone important. Very important. The general surveyed the gas station with calm eyes before his gaze settled on Vanessa. A warm smile appeared on his face. Genuine respect. Genuine familiarity. He began walking toward her. The major immediately stepped aside. The man in civilian clothes did the same. Conversations disappeared completely. Officer Ryan Mercer stood motionless as the realization slowly approached him from across the parking lot, one measured step at a time. The general stopped directly in front of Vanessa and smiled with the familiarity of someone greeting a trusted colleague rather than a stranger. The crowd watched in stunned silence. The gas station lights reflected softly off the polished insignia on his uniform, while the evening breeze carried the scent of gasoline and distant rain. Vanessa straightened slightly and greeted him with quiet professionalism. "Good evening, sir." The general nodded. "Colonel Carter." The words landed with the weight of a dropped stone in still water. Several people in the crowd looked at one another immediately. Others glanced back toward Officer Ryan Mercer, whose expression had frozen somewhere between confusion and disbelief. The title echoed through the parking lot. Colonel, not sergeant, not veteran, not former officer. Colonel, active leadership, active responsibility, active service. The major standing nearby lowered his eyes briefly, almost as if acknowledging a fact that should have been obvious from the beginning. Ryan swallowed. "Colonel," he repeated. The general turned toward him. "Yes, Colonel Vanessa Carter." The officer opened his mouth, but no words came out. The certainty that had carried him through the evening was beginning to crumble under the growing weight of reality. Around them, phones continued recording. Yet now nobody seemed interested in capturing a confrontation. They were witnessing a revelation. The general looked toward Vanessa's travel bag resting beside the SUV. His gaze settled on the military decorations attached to the worn fabric. "Still carrying the same bag?" he asked with a faint smile. Vanessa nodded. "It still works." A few people laughed softly. The tension eased for everyone except Ryan. The conversation sounded natural, familiar, the kind shared by people who had worked together for years. The general turned back toward the crowd. Colonel Carter has spent most of the last year coordinating one of the largest logistical operations in our command. The parking lot fell silent again. Thousands of service members depended on her leadership. Vanessa looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention. Recognition had never interested her. Responsibility had. The general continued. Tomorrow morning she is scheduled to receive formal recognition for exceptional service. Harold Bennett removed his veteran cap and held it against his chest. His eyes glistened beneath the bright canopy lights. Something about the moment affected him deeply. Perhaps it was the realization that a woman who had dedicated so much to her country had spent the last hour defending her identity to strangers. Perhaps it was something simpler. Respect recognizing respect. Ryan finally found his voice. I was trying to verify information. The statement sounded weaker than he intended. The general regarded him calmly. Verification is important. Ryan nodded quickly. Exactly. The general paused. So is listening. The words were not delivered harshly. There was no anger in them. Somehow that made them even more powerful. Vanessa remained silent. She had no interest in embarrassing anyone. The major stepped forward carrying a folder retrieved from one of the vehicles. He handed it to the general. Inside were official documents confirming Vanessa's assignment, rank, and current status. The general glanced at the papers before closing the folder again. He did not need to read them. Everyone present already understood. The truth had become impossible to ignore. Ryan looked toward Vanessa. For the first time all evening, he seemed to actually see her rather than the assumptions he had placed upon her. He noticed the exhaustion in her eyes from a 400-mile drive. He noticed the quiet patience she had maintained despite repeated doubts. He noticed the confidence that came not from arrogance, but from years of carrying responsibility few people could imagine. The realization settled heavily over him. Above them, the American flag continued moving gently against the dark Carolina sky. The crowd stood completely still. No one cheered. No one celebrated. The moment felt too important for that. It was something quieter, something deeper. A lesson unfolding in real time beneath fluorescent lights and the hum of fuel pumps. And standing at the center of it all was Vanessa Carter, who had never once needed to prove her worth to know exactly who she was. The general's words lingered in the night air long after he finished speaking. Nobody seemed eager to move. The crowd that had gathered out of curiosity now stood quietly beneath the canopy lights, watching a very different scene from the one they had expected. The excitement of confrontation had disappeared. In its place was reflection. Vanessa glanced toward the highway beyond the gas station. Streams of headlights flowed steadily through the darkness, each vehicle carrying people with destinations, responsibilities, and stories nobody else could see. The sight reminded her how often people formed judgments after only a brief glance. She had spent years teaching young officers that leadership began with understanding before action. Tonight felt like an unexpected lesson in the same principle. Officer Ryan Mercer stood a few feet away, unusually silent. The confidence that had driven every question earlier in the evening had faded. He stared at the pavement for several moments before finally looking up. Around him, the flashing lights from his cruiser reflected across the fuel pumps and convenience store windows. What had once felt like authority now seemed strangely small against the larger reality unfolding around him. Harold Bennett slowly stepped forward. The retired Marine adjusted his cap and looked at Vanessa with quiet respect. "Ma'am," he said softly, "thank you for your service." Vanessa smiled warmly. "Thank you for yours." Harold nodded once. Nothing more needed to be said. The exchange carried a mutual understanding built on years of sacrifice, discipline, and commitment. Nearby, several people lowered their phones completely. Recording no longer felt important. Witnessing did. The general glanced toward the American flag waving above the station. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked back at the gathering crowd. "The uniform matters," he said quietly. "But character matters more." The words were simple, yet they settled over the parking lot with remarkable weight. Vanessa understood exactly what he meant. Throughout her career, she had met extraordinary people whose contributions were invisible to the public. Mechanics who kept aircraft flying, medics who saved lives, parents who waited at home through long deployments. Service was not always obvious. Sometimes it looked like courage. Sometimes it looked like patience. Sometimes it looked like refusing to lose dignity when others doubted you. A cool breeze swept through the station, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly and enjoyed the feeling. After months of constant responsibility, she had been looking forward to a quiet trip home. Instead, she had found herself standing beneath fluorescent lights explaining truths that should never have required explanation. Yet surprisingly, she felt no bitterness. Only exhaustion and perspective. Ryan finally stepped forward. His expression was no longer defensive. It was thoughtful, human. "Colonel Carter," he began. The title sounded different now. Not skeptical, respectful. Vanessa turned toward him. The crowd watched carefully. Some expected anger. Others expected a lecture. Instead, silence stretched between them for several seconds. Ryan took a slow breath. "I should have listened more carefully." The admission was simple, honest. Vanessa studied him for a moment. She saw embarrassment, certainly, but she also saw something else. Understanding beginning to take shape. Real understanding often arrived quietly. Not with arguments. Not with humiliation. With recognition. "We all make decisions based on limited information sometimes," she replied. "The important thing is what we learn afterward." Ryan nodded slowly. The response seemed to surprise him. Perhaps he had expected resentment. Instead, he found grace. Above them, the flag continued moving gently against the Carolina sky. The fuel pumps hummed softly. The convenience store doors opened and closed as customers resumed ordinary routines. Life was beginning to move forward again. Yet something had changed. Not only for Ryan. Not only for the crowd. The lesson belonged to everyone who had witnessed the evening. Vanessa picked up her worn duffel bag and rested it on her shoulder. The patches attached to the fabric caught the light once more. They looked no different than they had hours earlier. The only difference was that people finally understood what they represented. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but not completely. Many people lingered near their vehicles as though they understood they had witnessed only part of a much larger story. Vanessa adjusted the strap of her duffel bag and prepared to continue her journey, but the general raised a hand gently. "Before you leave, Colonel, there is something these people should know." Vanessa paused. The major and the others exchanged brief glances. Ryan stood quietly nearby, listening more carefully now than he had at any point that evening. The general looked toward the gathering and spoke with the calm confidence of a leader accustomed to addressing difficult truths. Most people see rank and assume authority. What they do not see are the years behind it. His eyes moved toward Vanessa. 22 years of service. Multiple overseas assignments. Thousands of soldiers under her command at different points in her career. Countless decisions that affected lives and families. The parking lot became silent again. The words painted a picture far larger than a title ever could. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. Recognition had always felt heavier than responsibility. Responsibility made sense. Recognition never did. The general continued. "Last winter, during a severe logistics crisis overseas, many believed the operation would fail. Supply routes were collapsing. Equipment deliveries were delayed. Entire units were facing shortages." He smiled faintly. "Colonel Carter solved the problem in less than 48 hours. Several people stared at Vanessa with growing amazement. The woman standing beside the old SUV no longer looked ordinary to them. Yet Vanessa knew she was exactly the same person she had been when she first pulled into the gas station. Nothing about her had changed. Only what others understood about her. Harold Bennett shook his head slowly. 48 hours, he whispered. "That is incredible." The general nodded. Lives depended on it. Ryan looked toward Vanessa. The realization seemed to deepen with every passing minute. Earlier that evening, he had focused entirely on proving her wrong. Now he was learning about achievements that affected people across continents. The contrast unsettled him. One of the younger soldiers standing near the vehicles suddenly smiled. "She left out the best part, sir." Vanessa immediately looked toward him. "Do not." The young soldier laughed softly. "She always does that." Several others smiled knowingly. The general folded his arms. "Go ahead." The soldier nodded. When the operation succeeded, headquarters offered Colonel Carter public recognition. She declined. A few people in the crowd looked confused. "Why?" someone asked. The soldier answered without hesitation. "Because she said the soldiers doing the work deserved the credit more than she did." Silence followed. Not dramatic silence. Thoughtful silence. the kind that settles over people when they encounter genuine humility. Ryan lowered his eyes briefly. For the first time all evening, he understood that the most important thing about Vanessa was not her rank, her awards, or even her accomplishments. It was her character. The realization hit harder than any correction ever could. Vanessa looked toward the dark highway beyond the gas station. Clouds were gathering in the distance. Rain would probably arrive before midnight. She thought about her mother waiting at home. She thought about the ceremony scheduled for the next morning. Most of all, she thought about how easily a single assumption could change the course of a day. The general checked his watch and smiled. "You still have a long drive ahead." Vanessa nodded. "Yes, sir." "Then do not let us keep you." A few people chuckled softly. The tension that had defined the evening was gone now. In its place remained something far more powerful. Respect. Earned not through explanations, arguments, or titles, but through quiet integrity displayed when it mattered most. As Vanessa opened the driver's side door of her SUV, Ryan stepped forward once more. This time there was no authority in his posture, only sincerity. "Colonel Carter," he said quietly. Vanessa turned toward him. "Yes." Ryan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I think tonight taught me something I should have learned a long time ago." Vanessa studied him carefully. Then she nodded once. Not because the lesson was complete, but because the first step had finally begun. Vanessa rested one hand on the open door of her SUV and looked at Ryan for several seconds. The gas station had grown quieter now. Most customers had returned to their routines, but a handful remained nearby, drawn not by curiosity anymore, but by the feeling that something meaningful was taking place. The bright canopy lights reflected across the pavement, turning small puddles into mirrors of white and gold. Ryan stood with his hands at his sides, no longer trying to control the situation, no longer searching for evidence. He was simply listening. "What did it teach you?" Vanessa asked gently. Ryan exhaled slowly. The answer clearly mattered to him. "That I saw a story before I saw a person." The words hung in the air. Nobody interrupted. The general remained silent. The major remained silent. Even Harold Bennett watched quietly from several feet away. Ryan continued. "I looked at a few details and decided I already knew everything." He glanced toward the patches attached to Vanessa's duffel bag. "Then every answer you gave me became something I tried to fit into that decision instead of something I actually considered." Vanessa nodded slightly. She had spent years leading soldiers from different backgrounds. She understood how difficult it was for people to admit mistakes honestly. "That happens more often than most people realize," she said. Ryan lowered his eyes briefly. "It should not." The breeze strengthened for a moment, causing the American flag overhead to ripple sharply against the dark sky. The sound seemed to punctuate his words. Vanessa followed his gaze upward. "No," she agreed quietly. "It should not." For several moments nobody spoke. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. It was the kind of silence that appears after people stop defending themselves and start learning. The general finally smiled. "Growth usually begins there." Ryan nodded. "I think I understand that now." Vanessa looked toward the highway again. The long drive home still waited for her. So did her mother. So did tomorrow's ceremony. Yet something about the evening felt unfinished. Not because she needed an apology. She had already received one. Not because she needed recognition. She had never sought it. It was because moments like this created opportunities. Opportunities to leave people better than they had been before. She turned back toward Ryan. "When I was a young lieutenant," she said, "I thought leadership meant having answers." Ryan listened carefully. "Then one of my commanders taught me something different." The crowd remained still. "He told me leadership begins with asking whether you might be wrong." A faint smile appeared on the general's face. He seemed to recognize the lesson. Vanessa continued. "Not because you lack confidence. Because confidence without humility becomes blindness." Ryan absorbed every word. "I think tonight showed me exactly what that looks like." Vanessa nodded. "Then it was not a wasted evening." Harold chuckled softly. "That might be the most generous description I have ever heard." Several people laughed quietly. The tension that had once dominated the gas station felt impossibly distant now. Ryan managed a small smile of his own. "Most people would not have handled this the way you did." Vanessa adjusted the strap of her bag. "Most people have different experiences." Ryan understood what she meant. The statement was not criticism. It was perspective. There was a difference. The first drops of rain finally began to fall. Tiny circles appeared across the pavement. A soft tapping sound echoed from vehicle roofs and windshields. The crowd started moving toward their cars. The general extended his hand toward Vanessa. She shook it firmly. The major did the same. Several soldiers nearby offered respectful nods before returning to their vehicles. One by one, the gathering began to dissolve back into ordinary life. Yet before entering his cruiser, Ryan looked back once more. Vanessa was climbing into her SUV, preparing to continue the journey that had been interrupted hours earlier. For the first time that evening, he did not see a stranger. He did not see assumptions. He did not see a role, a category, or a conclusion. He saw a person, and somehow that simple change felt larger than everything else that had happened beneath the lights of the gas station. Rain followed Vanessa for nearly 60 miles before finally fading into a light mist. The highway stretched ahead beneath a dark sky, illuminated by the steady glow of headlights and distant exit signs. Inside the SUV, the radio remained off. After everything that had happened, silence felt more valuable than noise. Her duffel bag rested on the passenger seat beside her, the familiar patches catching occasional flashes of light from passing vehicles. Around midnight, she finally pulled into the small North Carolina town where she had grown up. The streets were quiet. Storefronts were dark. Familiar buildings passed by her window like old photographs brought briefly back to life. When she turned onto her mother's street, a single porch light was still glowing. Vanessa smiled. Some things never changed. Her mother opened the front door before the engine was even off. No speeches, no ceremony, just a warm embrace and a whispered welcome home. For a little while, the long drive, the gas station, and the entire evening seemed very far away. The next morning arrived clear and bright. Sunlight poured across the military installation where hundreds of service members had gathered. Rows of uniforms filled the ceremony grounds. Flags moved gently in the morning breeze. Families sat together beneath white canopies. Children pointed toward the formation while proud parents adjusted cameras and straightened jackets. Vanessa stood quietly among fellow officers waiting for the ceremony to begin. Her uniform was immaculate. The same woman who had stood beneath fluorescent gas station lights the night before now stood beneath a clear Carolina sky, surrounded by people who knew exactly who she was. Yet nothing about her posture suggested triumph. She looked exactly as she always had. Calm, focused, grounded. When her name was announced, applause rose across the field. She walked toward the stage with measured steps. The general from the previous evening stood waiting near the podium. As she approached, he smiled. Not because of her rank, not because of her awards, because of the example she represented. The recognition ceremony was brief. Vanessa preferred it that way. She accepted the honor with humility and returned to her place among the formation. But as she turned, something caught her attention. Near the back of the crowd stood a familiar figure. Officer Ryan Mercer. He was off duty. No cruiser. No uniform hat. Just a man standing quietly among dozens of spectators. Vanessa paused for a fraction of a second before continuing. Ryan did not wave. He did not try to approach. He simply stood there watching, learning, reflecting, understanding. Later, after the ceremony ended and families began gathering for photographs, Ryan turned and walked toward the parking area. He carried no bitterness, only perspective. Before leaving, he stopped beside a flagpole overlooking the parade grounds. The American flag moved steadily above him, bright against the blue sky. For several moments, he stood there alone. Then he removed a small notebook from his pocket and wrote a single sentence before closing it again. People are more than the assumptions we place on them. Several yards away, Vanessa was preparing to leave with her mother. She never saw what he wrote. She never needed to. Some lessons do not require witnesses. As she walked across the sunlit grounds, young soldiers greeted her with smiles and respectful nods. Families laughed together. Children chased one another across the grass. The morning felt peaceful, ordinary, exactly the kind of day she had spent her career protecting. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. The flags continued to wave. Somewhere in the distance, a bugle sounded. Vanessa looked toward the horizon for a moment, then continued forward. The sunlight caught the insignia on her uniform before settling across the path ahead. And without another word, she kept walking into the bright Carolina morning.